Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
Pop quiz. What do you call a female shaman?
We're not going to do a pop quiz because, last time that got our PM into troubles during COVID. So I'm not sure if we should go there, or are we just taking the piss as usual? A female shaman?
A female shaman is called a shamanka. So there's actually a word for a female shaman that is gender appropriate.
Oh, I did not know that. That's great.
And even though you may not recognize it, we're talking about them on the show today. But who is on the show today?
I don't think it was a female shaman, but unless I'm way more drunk than I usually am. So today we have Didier Bonnet, who's dialing in from Switzerland very kindly, and his book Hacking Digital, all about digital transformation, aspects of it. Some really good chat, not only because we're both in the middle of a big digital transformation and digital build project ourselves, but as usual, we've been abusing our podcast where we get people and don't have to pay them for it to get some free advice and consulting on our own projects. We're putting our own work in. Okay, it's sort of
We're adding value too.
Yeah, and we're only picking the most amazing books, so buy them all. There you go. So yeah, what were your takeaways? What were your consulting insights? I'm being awful.
So what I really loved was he was talking about these boards of directors that decide that what they really ought to do is go out and hire some shaman or shamanka, some digital guru from Google, and that would then solve everything. And of course, they quickly realized that just having someone with digital guru experience, a digital shaman, a digital shamanka, isn't going to solve everything. You actually need to have a why behind digital transformation. My other big takeaway was, I'm the one that says governance, I'm allergic to the word governance. It's like pouring molasses into the middle of the machine. It's just going to kill every project that I've ever seen. But he says, you can also use governance to protect innovation. You can use governance to keep the white blood cells from killing your innovation project. I'm like, okay, if I can use governance for something good, that's great. Last thing, he hates the word governance as much as I do. So if you, our lovely listeners, can find another word other than governance, we'd love to hear it, and so would Didier. But what were your takeaways?
Yeah, so thanks for taking all my points again. But I think the big thing as usual is this, and I think actually I'm gonna pick on a very obvious one. I mean, which means where to start, digital transformation or change or being more resilient, being modernizing a company. There's always at least two things that are obvious. One is about, well, actually technology is not going to be the silver bullet or the golden bullet or actually the differentiator. It's not going to make a difference to just buy more tech and that will save us all. The second one is that if that's not the case, who's going to make the decision? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the governance as well. So the first step therefore is, if technology is not the defining sector, then therefore who's going to make the decision? And it can't just be the CTO and the tech people, right? To influence how the organization should look like after. It needs to be a widespread approach, anything from people who actually are very close to the customer, get the insights, because they know how the market actually looks like. They know really what people want. And often tech is very removed from that, not by its own fault. And that's the thing. So tech doesn't matter. Governance needs to shift and sit somewhere else. And that's not just across from tech and that. So tech defining how a solution looks, but also what he mentioned is, well, the leaders are learning better. So the board of directors or the C level are more and more waking up to, okay, we don't know, but we're going to involve more people to do so, right? So setting direction is good. So we talk about communication here, but actually people are starting to get more open to different ideas and do these things differently. Because the how, as he says, is really, really hard. Most people don't have an answer to that because it's highly complex. And I and you, we've been in too many situations where you easily end up after about half an hour of talking, you realize, yeah, it's a culture change. This is where we end up. And if you do culture change, what matters? Well, you have to communicate the hell out of it. Technology should enable it. And you have to start asking different questions that you never asked before. So I'm going a bit off piece there, probably because I'm quite excited about new project. I've been in these workshops all week, but he talks really lovely about it, and I really appreciated that because he says hacking digital, but he says digital transformation is just a starting point to tell everyone that transformation is not digital anymore. Maybe it has
Hmm.
never been. So I like that.
Well, let's go have a conversation with him and where he can tell us more.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, wickedpodcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Didier Bonnet. Hello, Didier, and welcome to our show.
Hello, happy to be here.
And as usual, we start at the top, which means please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
Well, so I'm currently a professor at IMD Business School in Switzerland. And prior to that, I was for many years the strategy consultant, and I've looked at the field of digital transformation for over a decade now, and see how it evolved. I wrote a first book about more the strategy angle of digital transformation, and then realized talking to practitioners that the strategy was probably the simplest thing, and everyone was struggling with the how we do it kind of topic. So we decided with a colleague to pick up the baton and try to learn from 10 years of experience what has actually worked, what has not worked, and structure the Hacking Digital book that way in a way of trying to find shortcuts for people that are struggling with a number of issues and challenges in digital transformation.
So I'm gonna jump right in and challenge the topic of the book.
Right.
Digital transformation. I mean, I've read several articles and even discussed it myself that the word digital is almost redundant these days. It's transformation at a more general level. How do you think? Is it just digital, or does digital have a broader meaning, or what are you thinking as of today?
Yeah, I think this is I kind of totally agree with you because to me and people miss that is there's too much focus on the digital. It's actually it's a business transformation, uh, and they're all very very difficult, very hard, very long. It just happens to be fueled by a whole pile of technologies that have been emerging over the last few years, and to some extent merging together to create possibilities that we didn't have. But we shouldn't lose the fact that these are first and foremost business transformation, trying to move corporation from A to B, and therefore. This is where the difficulty lies. I think the second point I would make is I totally agree with you. Digital transformation, when I first started, no one was talking about that. Today, everyone talks about that, right? If you produce a piece of software or a piece of kit, you're into digital transformation. At least your marketing team is. But it's the reason why I'm still using it is because I think I still like people to understand that it's not just about digital. The transformation part is really the most difficult, and really this is the focus of the current book. It's really to try to decipher, okay, these are complex transformation. Can we focus on the how bit? How do we actually change organization? What are the main challenges? And at the end of the day, some of the challenges are to do with technology and digital technology, but very few. Most of them are to do with the traditional hurdles that we've seen to some extent in the past in digital transformation. I think what the only thing that digital is adding is there's a whole capability and skill set that we need to instill into our workforces that probably was less important 10, 15 years ago when we were doing just normal business transformation. So I think there are some differences, but I guess it's a long answer to say I agree with you.
I think it's good to agree. We will maybe disagree on some things a bit later. But so let me then ask. So if it isn't digital, and I think it's probably a really good point to start and say, look, let's start with digital transformation, but then move you away from it to understand that it is not priority. But if that's not the key aspect that transformation needs, what in your experience then therefore is sort of more of the areas one should look at?
In terms of transformation, you mean, or I,
Exactly. Like, so yeah,
I don't
what
want to give
contributes
the
to the success? Yeah.
yes, I don't want to give the impression that the digital bit doesn't matter, because it does. I mean, this is what really is fueling a lot of the change in competition, in disruption, and so on and so forth. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the transformation difficulty that we saw, a few years back, to do with people, organization, processes, incentives, blah 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 blah, all these things are still as valid in today's digital transformation as they were before we even invented the word digital transformation. I guess so. That's really, and you see that in the book with some of the challenges that a few of them are to do with the application of technology, but the bulk of it is to do with how do we actually manage those organizations and change those organizations using the beauty of the application that of the technology that allows us to do wonderful new applications, and in terms of efficiency or customers or whatever.
Yes, really well said. And I want to then therefore move it a bit into. So I just literally started a new project last week, and whenever you start a new one, you try to go back to your checklist of like,
Yeah.
okay, let's see what's in place, let's see what's not in place. And obviously, currently we're talking about governance, and for me, governance is always a big aspect towards not sort of how what are we actually doing, why we're doing what we're doing, and who decides what we're actually doing.
Right.
And it seems to be quite a big issue. So I want to ask you around governance a bit, because I think in the book you mention it here and they say, what is sort of digital governance or governance, sort of for transformation in particular. Governance is very, very essential,
Right.
because often you have a shift and a change of it. So
Right.
can you elaborate a little bit on governance, please?
Yes.
And before you do,
Yeah.
I'm the one that thinks that governance is just pouring molasses in the middle of the machinery, and governance is one of my least favorite words.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
necessary evil at best. And with that, I'll let you answer.
Yes. Well. So again, the word governance itself has got all these connotation of bureaucracy and adding layers and all this kind of stuff. And I wish I could find a different term to describe what I think is important, because one thing we've learned from earlier research that I did, and we've learned again working with companies, is that unfortunately governance is essential to success. So we looked at companies that were failing and companies that were succeeding, and also all of the companies that we saw succeeding had put in their organization a level of governance. And now you can ask why. Uh, and the why was really simple: is that whichever way you twist your organization, you're going to create silos, uh, pockets of isolation, whether they are functional, whether they're geographical, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, having looked at organization for many decades now, no, it's not a perfect science. So you can go matrix, you can go top down, you can go bottom up, you can go whatever. There will always be a number of silos and problems in getting the organization to cooperate. And I think this is being really emphasized by digital technology, and particularly by digital transformation, because as you know, any application. So I'll take an example, like I want to have a multi-channel experience in retail. Well, to do that, you need to involve your marketing guys and sales guys, of course, your customers, your operations people, your stores, and so you need to already connect whole pile of people that are in different boxes in your organization, and that's where the governance model becomes important. The second part, I think, of why it's really really important is that we call digital transformation as a loose terms, but I think for me, within digital transformation, there are at least three different layers. There are what I would call modernization. So I used to have this process working with pen and paper, and I'm digitizing it, which is great, which is increasing efficiency, but it's really to some extent automating or digitizing the existing. Then there's a different, there's a more complex application, which is like the one I've just mentioned. Like I want to align all my channels into an omni-channel strategy or whatever, where you have to start really aligning the dots in the organization, and that starts requiring a high level of governance. And again, you're probably there in the main, digitizing and improving the existing. And then there's a next area, which is really when you start exploring, when you are looking at new areas, where you are looking at new business model, when you're looking at different products and services and so on and so forth. And there you need a level of governance to protect, to some extent, the innovation or the experimentation from the sort of antibodies of the natural organization that tends to chunk it and swallow it very quickly if you're not careful. So that's
Mhm.
to me why governance is important. Is first of all to some extent plaster over the cracks of our traditional organization, but also build the space and the safety to actually experiment on new business model that could be the main source of revenue for a company in 5 to 10 years from now. So I hope that's helped to understand why. And governance is if you have a better name for it, I'm a taker because I hate the word, but I can't find of anyone else.
Well, I quite liked when you said it protects innovation as well, because in my head, and actually this opened a nice new door, or that I should have known before, is that in my head, governance was always about you have a bunch of people who are the ones who make the decisions, right? And that's it. That's governance. But actually, to say it supports and protects, I think
Yeah,
that's for example one aspect I few times I think heard people talk about in
yeah,
connection to governance. But then my next question would be, so that's a really nice expansion, the way you said it. But my next question would be, so currently as well, and I've seen this a bit over 3 years ago in a project I was to highly successful, the level of communication. So not decision making itself, but basically having a vision, setting a very clear direction in terms of, let's say, principles and main guiding points, not really in detail to make any decision at all. So, not really even touching the governance level at all, but just saying, look, this is why we're here, this is what we're doing, these are our principles, this is the space within we act, and this is the value we want to produce. And that worked amazingly well to influence and inform every decision on a governance level. And I'm rambling nearly, but how do you see the difference of impact between the communication and governance, therefore? How are they related, do you reckon?
so I think it's huge. So the way I tend to simplify it is to say, it's all about the why, the what, and the how. So the why is, why the hell are we doing this? Because if you don't need to transform, let's don't. It's hard. It's painful. So why we're doing it is really important. It's exactly what you're saying. How do we define, an ambition and a direction that therefore we can communicate to our employees, but also to external partners, to our customers, to our to the financial community, and so on and so forth. So, and it sounds crazy what I'm going to say, but very often the why is not very clear in a lot of
Yeah,
organization. It seems to me that a lot of people, you kind of close the door with a few executives and say, why are you doing this? And oh, because my competitor's doing it, or because I've just been to California and I've seen everyone's doing digital transformation, so I should do it. And these are not good enough reasons. So I think that that step, which seems so obvious to say, why are we actually doing it? And I would say that the why is also important because you need to somehow put a time frame on what you're trying to do. And I'm so I'm so disappointed with what we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years, which is this kind of disruption mania. Like every industry is going to die being disrupted by, two guy and a dog from San Francisco or something like that. And I kind of say, okay, I think we have seen industry being disrupted. Music. I used to work in music, so I know it was painful. But
Yeah.
there are different time frame. If you take banking, for instance, of course, banking is being disrupted in some area, but more or less, I live in London. Well, the banks that are at the top of the pile are still the banks that were at the top of the pile a decade ago. So I think we have to be a little bit careful and really spend time on the why to see not just the ambition and the direction, but also the timing of things. And then the what is really about, what do we change? How do we differentiate? Where do we invest our pounds or dollars in trying to effect change in the organization, which is more around, changing the customer experience, improving operation, improving the employee experience, or changing your business model, right? And then the how is really what Hacking Digital book is about. Is really more about, okay, now if we now know where we are going and why we're going there, then how do we align the organization to be responsive to the change that's needed?
And that's so accurate that people are not spending enough time in the why, and they're trying to go straight to the how.
Yeah,
One of the things that I wrote in one of the questions, Milton Friedman, and generally I'm not a fan of Milton Friedman, but he had a great quote: "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around."
right.
And I think that's so true, and we've seen a lot of that around COVID.
Yeah,
It is the crisis that's driven change, and you can substitute transformation, digital and otherwise, for the crisis that's happened.
yeah,
But my question is going to be moving away from that to a totally different trend called co-opetition,
right.
collaborating with the competition. Instead of working from a relentless focus on kill the competition and grow my market share, realizing that there are opportunities by collaborating with competition. Um, do you see that change happening, or is it just me and wishful thinking?
No, no, I for sure see that trend happening. I would say it's not that new. And let me try to find an example. So I worked a lot in mobile telephony, and if you remember, going back again a few years, it was all about getting into large metro areas like London or Paris or New York and things. And it was a real estate plan, right? He said, "How can I get to the tallest building and stick my antenna there before my competitor will get in there?" And of course, there was a lot of real estate people, edging the pricing and all this kind of stuff. So everyone went out, and it was just about putting antenna all over the place so you can get your network coverage to work. And then I think what people realized was like, actually, as a consumer, do you really care about how the network is structured? Or I think what you do care is that it works and that you've got decent coverage. But beyond that, which we're kind of getting now in most cities, who cares about how the network is put together? And what the mobile operator did in the end is share the network, right? Which is a kind of form of co-opetition, as you're saying, because it's the infrastructure is a big part of the cost. But I think what they realize is, let's fight the battle on what matters, which is the consumer front end, the devices, the service, the after sale, and so on and so forth. So I think that was an example of where we've seen that happening. I think we're seeing more and more of that, particularly in platform type plays. When people are building ecosystems, very often with partners that have nothing to do with their particular skill set, but also with competitors that can play a part in what they do and make money out of it, right? And it becomes more about how you share the pie. So I guess the idea is, can I make the pie bigger? I mean, and this is really a fundamental thing. We've for years trained people to think that there is one pie and it's how you carve it, right? So I want a bigger slice of the cherry cake, right? Than you guys. Actually, if you can people to work with you to make the pie bigger, then it's all about how you share that revenue afterwards. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that, particularly in platform and ecosystem type plays, as we're seeing today. I actually think that maybe a third point, that we probably will see an increase around, I don't know what to call it, but maybe industry cooperation, because of the sustainability movement. Because
Mm.
it's actually, once you start thinking about, beyond all the hype and stuff, when you actually start looking at how do I really trace my supply chain from point A to point B, and all the complexity around it, I'm not sure that a single company can actually do that. And I think we'll see a lot more um, industry solutions to this kind of problem, recycling and understanding the various components of the supply chain. So I actually see that as a benefit, moving competition maybe somewhere else, or somewhere different than what we've seen in the past. And I think that there are people. Unfortunately, it's it's also down to a lot of leadership. There are people that are still in the old model, that there is only one pie and we need to cut a larger slice.
Mm.
And there are people that are starting to see the ambition of, can we actually grow the pie, and try to find a different model where we share revenue and profit. And to some extent, what you said about COVID for me is a good example of that. We've seen a lot of people banding together. We've seen a huge amount of innovation that we would not have seen, I believe, if we weren't all driven by similar constraints globally. He was, for an academic, it's a wonderful worldwide experiment. Beyond
Yeah.
the tragedy of what happened, it is a wonderful global experiment in how you know the whole world and the whole corporations have actually reacted to a similar constraint, wherever you are in the world. And I'm not talking about working from home and all that. I mean, this is obvious, but beyond that, just the level of keeping the business running, and who I work with, and how do I treat my customers when all I can do is look at them on a screen. So I think that's and again, I don't know if you remember the book, and the lovely book and theory around the bottom of the pyramid, but he made exactly that point, that people under constraints sometimes tend to be much more innovative than people who have $1 million in their innovation department, right? Because the constraint will drive you to different solutions and more creative solutions. And I think COVID was a clear example of that. Not that I'm
Yeah, and
another one, but just,
yeah, it's interesting where things went, because I think I remember with Troy having conversations like in the beginning of it, and I said, look, I'm really curious how many people pick that up and say, okay, now we really have to do something new, and how many people are just double downing on old knowledge. And I've seen both over the last few years, and I don't know what the spread is yet, if it's more than 50-50 to the good side or not. But I want to maybe therefore, so next question, I want to go into undiscussables, because I've been in various discussions on projects where restrictions were set to. Just to give an example, when I was back working with advertising agencies on the McDonald's account, you were not allowed to propose anything that had anything to do with Twitter, because they had a really bad backlash on Twitter. So it's like, if you start with that, you're going to be out of the room very quickly, right? They don't want to hear about it. They know you know it, and therefore don't even talk about it, even if you would do it in a really great way. Is a no-go zone, right? I heard it here and there with different clients, different parts. Tell us about undiscussables. Can you hack and crack them, or can you work around them?
yeah, I think so. I think, at least, so it depends. It depends where they become problematic. I think certainly, as you're formulating your why, in this particular context, as we talked about, as you're talking about strategy and things, they tend to really be dangerous, I think, for organizations, because
Hmm.
you do need to open up to all possibilities. And I know exactly what you mean, because, I once worked for a corporation that had the most brilliant culture. I was in my sort of mid 30s, and I joined that company, and they had the most fantastic, optimistic culture. You were smiling when you walked in. Everybody was talking about wins and positive. In those days, we were getting voicemail as well about all the positive wins. I mean, everything was positive. So it was a good feeling, except when the market started turning, and people starting asking questions about what are we going to do in this particular geography because the sales are edging down, and like no one was there to listen. No, it was kind of silence in the room, in meeting
Wow.
room, where anybody raised something that was slightly negative, because the whole thing was propelled to really think forward and upward to some extent. So that's an example of where it becomes really, really problematic, because
That's
you're
right.
kind of avoiding and brushing things under the carpet, which you shouldn't. I think the way to avoid that, and again, it's a real trait of certain leaders which are able to do that, is to create what the psychologists call the psychological safety. So it's how do we find the space and the environment where people will feel comfortable, comfortable meaning, with their jobs, with their pay, with their everything, to actually express certain opinions that may not be part of the local culture normally. And I've certainly seen executives being able to do that really well. But you have to, you really have to show the way. I mean, if you're hitting people on the head every time they mention word X, then it's not okay to say in front of 20 people, right? Anybody has something to say about X, because no one will, right? So creating that psychological safety is a really important aspect of killing those, and or not killing the indiscussable, but more putting them on the table and encouraging really a very a rich and to some extent rational debate about what impact they have on the current working of the company and its strategy. So I think they could be. I think try to avoid them for too long, for me, is increasing the risk profile of an organization.
So we always have more questions than we have time. And now I'm going to challenge you to come up with a brief, succinct, kind of real zinger sort of answer to my question. I love the name of the chapter, Getting Your Board on Board. And I think the boards of directors are beholden to shareholders, and they're very, very risk averse at a lot of different levels. I talk about innovation projects. Only the best ones can survive the attack of the three knives:
Mhm.
legal, regulatory, and tax. How do you deal with a highly risk averse senior leadership and get them to the point they're willing to do or engage in a digital or general business transformation project?
Yes, so I think so. This is a very good point. So this is still a problem. We've so I'm running with a colleague at IMD a whole program on digital for boards, exactly for that reason. It's how do we make boards not only just understand the importance and the role of digital transformation within their organization, but what is the role they have to play in there? How can they understand what's going on and to some extent monitor and help what's going on? I think we're, to be honest, over the last few years, I've seen some improvements. I mean, it started by, the board is, digital is really important. Let's go and hire a guy from Google, or lady from Google, and that we know that did not help, right? Because you were surrounded by people that did not understand, and then you had this guru of digital. So that doesn't help. I think for board, it's more a raising the whole education of the board, or the education level. And I think we've seen some boards making real progress in doing that, not just by hiring, but also by getting, by making the board knowledge more experiential. Seeing what's happening often helps, and I think taking boards and showing boards some companies that have been through that successfully very often helps to get them on board, so to speak. Now, it's not everyone, and there are boards that are still very risk averse, that see digital transformation for them is a tech investment. So why should we be spending so much money on technology? And is it the IT person again that's pushing for a bigger budget? Blah 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 blah. So you've been there, but I do see a an increase in the sort of board IQ on digital in the last few years, and particularly in industries where it's become really the strategy. There's only one strategy and one way to go, which is digital, like retail, for instance, and others. We're seeing boards that are much more astute about what they're doing. Now, at the same time, they also have fiduciary um, things to do, right?
Yeah.
Tax, remuneration, and so on. So it's always a trade-off for boards as well in terms of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And I think in the boards that I've seen working the best, I have seen a really good collaboration between the executive management and the board of directors. Um, very often you find the CEO and the CFO are the only people talking to the board, right? Everyone else is bad. Uh, when you see this more transparent communication, and Netflix is a very good case of that, where they're very, very open with their boards and allow the board members to talk to executive management, ask questions, and so on. You'll see this functioning of the digital transformation happening much faster because you've got support, right? You've got support and understanding from the board level. Sorry, that wasn't the zippy answer.
But it was a complete answer, and I wasn't going to cut you off. But I am going to hand over to Marcus to wrap us up.
Yeah, I was just about to say it doesn't quite make a quote. It's it's a bigger statement, that one, but it's brilliant. Didier, it was keep things short. I see the same thing, that there's a better understanding now than it was maybe a few years ago. I think there's still a long way to go. I think your book is brilliant to point out some of the benefits and things to look out for in transformation, because I can see a lot of parallels. Things I can use now, what I'm doing now, things I revisit now from what I know, and reading your book. So it's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. Thank you for all your amazing answers and for your insight, and thank you for spending some time with us.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.